Hi, and welcome to the Mystic Feminine podcast. I am your host, Lucia Dami, and here I talk about all things divine feminine, archetypes, spirituality, tarot, creativity, and mysticism in a much more deep and authentic way than I do on other platforms. So, welcome if you're new, and welcome back if you're a regular here. I was just reflecting today at how I keep trying for these episodes to make notes before I sit down to record because it seems like a smart thing to do. But it never works. I kind of sit down and I'm like, no, I don't want to write notes. I don't want to write notes. I don't want to be prepared for what I have to say. I have lots that I want to say and I don't want to have to limit myself. And I think it's because, and I've said this many times, I think, on this podcast before, but I feel like when I am sharing on, say, social media, I do kind of have to script a little bit what I'm going to share because it's kind of timed, especially for reels. You sort of have like a minute and a half if you want to keep people's attention to say what you want to say. And I don't want to feel that way on here. So, yeah. But I do have a few topics that I want to touch on today. Well, primarily, in terms of personal update, I am on the other side of my exhibition, which feels amazing. May and June were very challenging months, in a personal way. And I think that was 100% reflected in my previous episodes. And I think that it had something to do with the fact that I was birthing these artworks and there was this kind of pressure, self-inflicted pressure, to create a certain outcome that I was desiring to create. And I think sometimes it's unhealthy to try and control the outcome of a creative process. However, sometimes it's necessary. And for this exhibition, it was necessary because I had given myself a goal to put on an exhibition. And then I had given myself the secondary goal for this exhibition to be a series of 22 artworks portraying the major arcana of tarot. And I wanted that pressure to push me to create something that I hadn't created before, to create in a way that I hadn't created before, and to sort of force myself into opening the floodgates of my creative essence and my creative voice in a way that I felt that I had lost. Maybe lost is the wrong word, but in a way that I felt, the light had sort of dimmed a little bit in terms of the fire of my creativity. And, sometimes as an artist, you have to put yourself through uncomfortable situations in order to grow creatively. And for me, that discomfort was pressure. And I can't tell you how difficult some of those artworks were to to birth. I don't have another word for it because it's not like I found it difficult technically to create them. It was challenging, of course. I learned a lot of new skills. I developed a lot of new skills, but emotionally it was challenging. And not just because of the pressure and the things that I spoke about, but because everything is interlinked. And so the specific wounds that I was moving throughout the creative process over the course of, let's say, 3 months of intense creative output for these artworks, those wounds were deeply interconnected with the person that I had to become in order to achieve what I had set myself out to achieve. And that happens in all areas of life. It's not just if you're an artist or a creative, but, sometimes when we want to expand, it can be easy to overlook the very subconscious aspects of ourselves that we need to integrate and heal in order to achieve that expansion, because that expansion requires often, if not always, a certain amount of death of an old self. it's so interesting now that I'm looking back on this whole journey and I have this hindsight, because 2 days after I put on that exhibition, after the opening night, because the exhibition is on now for another week or so, but 2 days after the opening night, I had this very painful revelation. And I'm not going to go into the details because it would be just like telling my whole life story. But it was with regards to something that I had been looking at for the last few months. And that's the interesting part for me, is that I had been working through it consciously, a certain pattern within myself. But the truth at the core of it was shocking nonetheless. And I think we often go through these moments where certain revelations that happen in our life, and I'm thinking of the Tower card, right, in tarot. If you're familiar with tarot, you'll know that the Tower represents these shocking changes or shifts that disrupt us and kind of pull the rug from under our feet. And really what the Tower does is it makes us see the truth of something. And often that truth can be really painful and destructive, but ultimately it leads us to a more truthful life and a life that is closer to our souls and our hearts and our authentic selves. But the Tower is one of the cards that people fear the most in tarot. And the funny thing is that I had a Tower moment on Friday, but it's often these Tower moments are not as out of the blue as you think. And I'm not talking about this kind of situation where like you have these intuitive nudges, you kind of ignore them, and then suddenly something is revealed and you realize what those intuitive nudges were pushing you to see. That is one example of a Tower moment. My Tower moment, I've never really had this before because I genuinely knew, and I was speaking about this particular thing and this particular story in my life in therapy, for example. And I've even spoken about it, with friends and things. But there was one more layer beneath that story of the painful, like this one-liner of this is where the pain comes from. And I guess why I'm sharing this is because everything is connected, and it's so easy to forget that when we are on the path of achieving our dreams. And I get this a lot with tarot clients, for example, who come for a reading and they're like, well, I don't know what to focus on because I want to ask about my career, but I also want to ask about love. And I also want to ask about, myself and my personal growth. And what I tell them is that we can focus on one, and I guarantee you, if you focus on that path and you listen to the cards and you take the guidance and the wisdom and you apply it to, say, your career path, you will see major shifts in your love life, your personal life, everything, your family as well. Because often the blocks that we have, they affect us in every area of our life. And that's definitely what I experienced with the creation of this exhibition, because in pushing myself to grow creatively, I also pushed myself, without realizing it, to grow personally, relationally. Last month, I spoke a lot about the maiden archetype and the myth of Persephone and the importance of that descent into the underworld and the important realizations that we have when we're in the underworld and the integration and alchemy that it pushes us to move through. And then when you come up again, you're a completely changed person, not just in one area of your life. You're changed in all areas of your life. So when I went through that underworld emotionally and I didn't give up on my creative process and I pushed through the struggle with birthing these pieces and I worked towards this opening night, I also worked myself towards kind of subconsciously and emotionally a big revelation that has shifted so much for me, specifically around the theme of receptivity. And when you take the theme of receptivity, you can apply it to everything in your life. For example, on the one hand, with this exhibition, I've pushed myself to be able to receive more, if not a different kind of visibility, more raw visibility. I'm in the gallery and I'm looking at people look at my work. I'm watching people purchase my work. I'm having to receive that. I'm getting to receive it, but it's always challenging when you have to grow past your own limiting beliefs. And so receiving that support and being seen and being invested in as an artist is such an amazing thing that I'm so grateful for. But I had to work past my limiting beliefs and my wounds in order to get there. And at the same time, so much is shifting for me in a somewhat painful but also beautiful way around realizing the wounds I have around receptivity in relationships, and specifically in my relationships with women. Something that we are focusing on now in the next season of the archetypal year is we're shifting from one of the previous archetypes from spring, which is the maiden, into the mother archetype. Now, that archetype is now live on my Patreon for everyone who is part of the online temple. If not, I highly encourage everyone to jump in there because learning the archetypes unlocks so much power and wisdom. But anyway, I'll link that below. And the mother archetype is the one that is the nurturer, that is the, let's say, the giver, the one who grows and gives life to her children, to her projects, her garden, her creativity. But equally through the mother archetype, we begin to understand how we receive those things from others, because our mother archetype, the one that was most present in our life, whether that's our biological mother, grandmother, other maternal authority figure, whatever it might be, conditions us with regards to those qualities of the feminine. Love, receptivity, nurturing, how we were conditioned to receive from the mother is what we then expect to receive from others. And it's also the relationship we have with that receptivity. Going back to the point that I made before, it was just such an interesting and I guess not coincidental timing that 2 days after I opened this exhibition, which has pushed me to be more receptive as an artist, I had this big realization around the wound that I have around receptivity in my relationship with women. And, I'm talking about friendship, sisterhood. I have always, throughout my whole life, been very comfortable, and I have to say really good, in the role of the one who gives the support. I guess you could say in that role of being a mother, I've been very good. When the role is reversed and I'm the one receiving, I am so uncomfortable. In fact, it's really kind of hit me in the last few days that I've subconsciously, intentionally chosen friendships where either both me and the other person are very hyper independent or where I'm helping the other person. And if my friend is helping me, it will not be with regards to something emotional. It'll be something practical, for example, if that makes sense. And I've had to kind of do the work to realize why that is. Looking at childhood, looking at my own dynamic with my mother, with my parents. It's not an easy thing to do. In fact, that's why this season on the archetypal year, where I'm teaching the online course about the 12 feminine archetypes, normally I release 3 archetypes on the equinox or the solstice. So the spring equinox, I released the maiden, the artist, the lover. And on the summer solstice, I was meant to release the mother, the warrior, and the queen, but I sort of hesitated and made a decision to just release the mother for now. The queen and the warrior will still come this season. But I did that because the mother archetype is kind of a sticky archetype to work with, because some of the other archetypes, we can work with them without having to go very deep into ourselves and like our past and our history and our conditioning. I mean, all of them kind of prompt us to do that anyway, but not all of them are so directly linked to a personal relationship on our life, as is the case with the mother archetype. Obviously, right? Because our relationship with that inner archetype of the mother cannot be separated from the conditioning we received in the dynamic we had with our mother figure. And everyone's dynamic and everyone's history with their mother will be different and will vary in degrees of how difficult it is to unpack that. But there will always be blind spots, because as a child, our mother is the one giving us life, is the one maintaining our life, nurturing our life, making sure that we're safe. We're completely, entirely dependent on our mother. So we are hardwired to kind of protect her image in our head and also protect whatever dynamics formed in those early years of our life, which means that sometimes we can have massive blind spots around the wounds that exist within that dynamic, because it can be, to our brain that is, say, still stuck in the brain of our baby/child self, it can be too scary to undo that, because it's still, that part of us still feels like our safety and our life and our well-being depends on that relationship being intact. Every person's journey is so unique, and the mother archetype is as old as time itself, so it's a sticky one to work with. And also we will have to return to it different chapters of our life, because what the work that I did with the mother archetype even 2 years ago was only just preparing me for the work that I'm doing now with the mother archetype. And then when I become a mother, that journey will deepen. If you are a mother now, if you're, a new mother, or if you've had kids for a long, long time, the chapter of the story, the narrative around that mother archetype is constantly shifting. The relationship that you have to giving and receiving will constantly have to shift and evolve as you evolve, as your life evolves. So it's a really important one, and it's a really important one to give space to, and to allow ourselves to meet that inner mother, that mother archetype, in whatever way we are ready to meet her and whatever level. We can't go all in all at once. It wouldn't be right to expect that of ourselves. Because then and this is my opinion, but only once you begin to unravel the personal layers of your personal relationship with your mother, can you then touch on the divine mother. And then there's that world is so beautiful. I've touched on it. I've had the honor to touch on it a few times in my life spiritually. And I'm not saying it's difficult to access. I'm just saying I haven't been able to go as deep as I want to there yet, because I'm still working through my own human dynamics with the mother archetype. But once you unravel those layers, you do begin to touch on that divine mother, that eternal, truly unconditional love, ever giving and equally as ever destructive, but so powerful. And that is another aspect of the mother archetype that we get to journey with as we work with our inner selves and our the landscape of our inner archetypes. And again, it looks different for every woman and every person who decides to journey with it. So why would we work with the mother archetype in the first place? You may be wondering, well, so that we can become even more abundant, even more receptive, so that we can receive love and pleasure and nurturing and care from people in our lives and our loved ones and from life itself in deeper and deeper and deeper ways. When we spoke about the maiden, the lover, and the artist archetypes, we also spoke about them being very receptive archetypes. The channels of those archetypes are constantly open to learning, open to receiving inspiration, receiving pleasure, receiving joy. They're very curious archetypes. They're open to evolving, open to shifting. So they are very receptive archetypes, but the core of the receptivity wound, let's say, of how much you allow yourself to receive in life from yourself and from others, is all kind of locked into that mother archetype. Even, and I think this is often overlooked, even when you think your wounds have everything to do with your patriarchal relationships, whether that be societally or personally, I can guarantee you a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it can come back to the mother. And if you can heal those wounds with the mother, you will liberate yourself from a lot of the conditioning that you believe comes from the patriarchy. And I'm not saying that the patriarchy doesn't condition us in very negative ways or hasn't repressed the feminine forever, because it has. But sometimes we can access that healing from the mother archetype more than we expect to. So one thing that I invite you to do this month is to reflect on your relationship to your receptivity, and to also reflect on your childhood experiences of feeling loved, nurtured, cared for, and safe to express your suffering or your pain with the women authority figures in your life, and then later in your life with your female friends. And then reflect on how that may have impacted the level to which you allow yourself to receive materially. So financially, in your work, the amount of visibility, praise, support that you allow yourself to receive for your achievements. Also, your relationship to food, because how we feed ourselves is also deeply connected to the mother archetype, how we nurture our body. You may be surprised at how much is interconnected in your life when it comes to your receptivity and your relationship to abundance and feeling nurtured and supported. But I guarantee you, once you begin to unpack and heal that wound in one aspect of your life, you will see the shifts happen everywhere else. So, and I think it's really important to remember that, especially when we're looking at a wound in our lives or a pattern and it feels too big to even begin to unpack. We don't know where to begin, right? It feels like it's too old, too set in stone for us to change. And it can be really reassuring to remember that actually, if we just pour our focus into one aspect of where that pattern plays out in our life, it will begin to soften all the other kind of areas in which it takes effect. So that's kind of everything that I wanted to share with you for this episode. Let me know how that resonated in the comments. Send me a message. I love to hear your feedback and your thoughts and your questions. And if there's anything in particular that you'd like to hear me talk about in the next episode, please let me know. Until then, I hope you have a beautiful month and I will speak to you soon. Bye.